All right, good morning, Doug. We are back with questions from members of the File. Files are a private group that you get access to when you're a paid subscriber to crisisinvesting.com. So if you want to ask Doug questions, this is the best way to do it. So Doug, first off, who were some of your biggest mentors?
Well, I'm not sure that I have anybody that really qualifies, but I've got to say that perhaps not having had a mentor per se, I would say that one of the biggest influences on my certainly professional life, but also personal life, is Harry Brown. We became quite good friends, and I had a lot of respect for Harry on so many different bases. He was very very high intelligence, and very intellectually honest. Uh, and he didn't like to BS anybody. And also, he was a stand-up comedian, inadvertently, never professionally. But I loved listening to him give speeches because he had very subtle humor that I'm convinced that the audience didn't catch most of the time. So anyway, uh, Harry was great. Other people that I've found were an influence on my life, not mentors. There was a private detective in Washington, D.C., who was actually very notorious and actually fit the model of, of, uh, of Pulp Fiction type private detectives in just about every way. It was Dick Bast. And I traveled a number of places in the world with Dick, and he was a wild and crazy character. He was one guy. One of his best lines is he said, "Yeah, if I ever run into that motherfucker in Beirut or Rangoon, it'll be a one-way trip for him." That's the kind of guy Dick was. He was a Pulp Fiction private detective that was interested in financial things, and I'd say another person is Herman Kahn, who was kind of the original jolly fat man. I mean, Herman must have gone, I don't know, maybe 350 pounds. But, I first met him when Al Gore, of all people, uh, invited me and Herman, which is pretty unbelievable. I was really flattered to his, Gore ran the Senate caucus on science and technology or something like that. And I used to have these luncheons in Capitol Hill and invite speakers. And Herman and I gave a speech, and I was the bear and he was the bull. And we got along really well over lunch. And one thing we agreed on is how stupid all these other people at the luncheon were. And I wrote about that lunch in Crisis Investing for the rest of the 90s and got together with them a number of times. Herman is famous for being the guy who wrote Thinking the Unthinkable and On Thermonuclear War, among other books. That was his thing. And if I was going to pick a third person uh, that I have warm feelings about, it would be Stanley Hyman. I don't think anybody knows who Stanley was, but he was a colonel in the Air Force, and he was a fighter pilot during the Korean conflict. And I understand that he was the most decorated fighter pilot, not the top ace, but the most decorated. So I don't know how the Air Force would. Well, we know an ace is anybody that shoots down 5 enemy planes. So I don't know but Stanley, after he got out of the Air Force, and he he loved trying small businesses, everything, ice cream, you name it. And he finally found what he was pretty good at, because he was also a fun guy, and he ran something called the Identity Research Institute, where he would give a course to military guys, mostly Pentagon guys, that were mustering out of the military. because most of these guys that have been in for 20 or maybe 30 years had been living in a bubble their whole lives. And
Institutionalized.
they really were. They had a certain, it was hard for them to get into the real civilian world after hanging out on bases their whole life and hanging out with other guys that are military guys. So Stanley would give them a course at the Pentagon on how to dress, even. Here's where you buy your clothes, and here's what you don't do, and here's what you do when you're trying to look like a real successful person. So, he invited me to give a speech to that group one time, and like Harry, and like Herman, he had a great sense of humor. He was really like Johnny Carson. So anyway, these guys are all dead now, so I can.
You don't like the term mentors at all. Like, what is it? What does that conjure up in your mind that feels inappropriate for any of these people?
Well, a mentor seems like, I mean, you thought about this more than I have. Is it a formal or an informal relationship to
The
start
only
with?
way I've ever seen them work is actually informally.
Informally?
Yeah, I mean, you have structured stuff within schools sometimes, and definitely within like big companies. Those aren't real. They're totally artificial. They're not based upon mutual respect or they're or mutual value creation or whatever. They're fake. They don't last.
Yeah, I guess it's just that generally you find somebody who's older and more experienced and you get along with them. Okay. Yeah, all
Yeah,
right then. So I
yeah.
guess those three guys would be mentors,
Okay.
frankly. Yeah.
All right. Next question is, how did you get involved in the commodities market?
Accidentally, because when I started trading commodities back in the 70s, it was much easier to open a commodities account and you could do it for a lot less money. And incidentally, that was way before commodity options, which didn't exist back then. So you bought a futures contract and hope for the best. So
With a lot
that's
of
where,
leverage.
yeah, it was really dynamite in those days because, now I still trade commodities, but now mostly uh, because if you're going to trade commodities, you got to, first of all, you should do it with lots of margin. So it's like just owning 5,000 bushels of wheat or whatever. And that's different than buying it with, 2% down or whatever the minimum you could get is sometimes. So it's generally speaking, what I do is I like to sell spreads. Uh, in other words, uh, sell a call that's or sell a put, and then another one to cover your or buy. It's complicated, and it's not the way people always used to trade. But anyway, and once again, when it comes to puts and calls, I don't particularly like to buy them. I like to sell them because the time premium, which is huge, is always running out. It's a wasting asset. So you want to sell wasting assets, not buy them. So that's why I don't like to buy puts and calls, generally speaking.
But what was it that first drew you to putting some money into the commodities market? Do you remember?
I don't. I guess it was first. I first got interested in gold. Then I got interested in silver, and one thing led to another.
And then you're trading bushels of wheat.
Yeah, and in those days they used to trade. They used to trade pork bellies, which you know, uh, well, they used to trade butter, and they used to trade eggs. They used to call commodity. And this was before my time. They used to call them butter and eggmen, is what they called commodity
Really?
trade. So, this is like ancient history.
Hmm.
But we still
Interesting.
had pork bellies, and we had potatoes. Got to trade potatoes. We got to trade milk. I don't think milk trades anymore.
I
So
don't think so either.
yeah, these contracts come and go, actually.
Hmm. Okay. Next question is, what do you think the best few USA states to live in are? And what do you think about Maine?
There's 50 US states. 51 if you count DC. They'll probably make it a state when the Democrats are back in office. 52 if you count Puerto Rico. That's a solid Democratic country. So,
What
and
about Canada?
huh?
What about Canada?
Maybe, but even before Canada, we'll probably get Haiti. That'll be the 53rd state, and the 54th will probably be the Ukraine. So I think Canada's probably going to have to wait in line. But anyway, out of all these states, Maine is the only one that's currently a state that I haven't been to. But John Hunt, my co-author on the Charles Knight novels, he likes to go to Maine during the summer. It's very nice during the summer. Uh, what can I say about Maine? I think it's got pretty high income taxes,
Hmm.
but and there's not much there, frankly. I
Well,
don't.
that might be a good thing in some ways. Depends upon your view of the future.
Yeah, Stephen King lives there. Does it have anything to do with his gloomy outlook on?
It could.
I don't know. So can't really say. Haven't put boots on the ground.
Do you have an
Lots of
impression
coast.
of
That's nice.
if you had to live in the U.S. full time now and you had to pick one location, is there a state that stands out? And obviously you have some bias here, or you've maybe already made your decision because you have a place in Virginia, but is there a state that stands out to you other than
Yeah,
that?
and Virginia is not the best choice, especially since my place is not so terribly far from Hampton Roads and Newport News and Virginia Beach. I mean, there's the biggest naval bases in the world, quite frankly. So it's not wise from that point. Virginia's not wise, generally speaking. Uh, it's not the worst. I guess Florida is number one, and it's likely
Hmm.
to stay that way. And Nevada is number two. And I guess South Dakota is okay, but it's kind of the middle of nowhere.
Right. Okay. All right. Could there be a big sell-off of U.S. bonds and dollars and a boycott of the U.S. as we see with Tesla right now?
I think it's actually happening. I understand that travel from Canada to the US is way, way off, like 50 to 60% less Canadians are coming down to the US for God knows what reasons. In fact, I think that most people, and Mexico, well, for whatever reason, Mexicans were coming to the US. There's a lot less of that. So
Hmm.
less Canadians, less Mexicans, and they're the two biggest tourist groups. Uh, I think they perceive it as being a little bit dangerous coming to the US, quite frankly. You never know. You might get rounded up. And the same thing with Europeans. I think they think it's kind of dangerous. And when it comes to investing in the US, uh, it's so chaotic where the president is so powerful and Trump, he's like a person with bipolar disorder, on again, off again, saying this, not. It scares people away from business. Nobody likes instability. And so, despite all the pluses of the US, the fact that Doge is there, that's really helpful. And the fact that it's much less regulated than Europe or Canada. I don't really know about Mexico from that point of view. So, yeah, I guess the answer to the question is yeah. That,
Well, we also see it in the bond market right now, right? Where the bonds are selling off big time. Yields are going up, and the dollar, the DXY is under 100 right now. So we are seeing some effect we are seeing results.
yeah, I watched the Canadian dollar because all these crappy little mining stocks are generally quoted in Canadian dollars. And just in the last week, it's gone from 70 cents about to 72 cents. That's a huge move for a currency, especially the Canadian dollar. And all the dollar is falling against all these currencies. So it's quite disturbing.
Yeah, and the bond market seems to be the one that scares the powers that be more than anything else, right? Because we have 9 trillion to refinance this year. If the rates on that keep going up, then it's going And if people are selling these things in general, where are the buyers going to come from? And if the buyers do show up, we're going to be paying much higher rates to refinance the debt.
Yeah, and if I was the Chinese government, I would be unloading that $1 trillion of treasuries that they own as quickly as I possibly could.
And I don't know if it's just the Chinese, but somebody's doing it. I mean, we kind of pushed the whole world very hard. We still are, I guess. So, I mean, I think all of them are concerned at this point.
I think everybody's doing it. Everybody can see that everything that Trump is doing augurs towards a weaker dollar. So you don't want to hold dollars, which means a good reason not to hold treasuries. And they can see the trend in motion after interest rates going down for 40 years from the early 80s to 2022, they bottomed. They're headed back up again. I mean, most of these government economists are not really economists, they're political hacks. But, a lot of them aren't really stupid, and they can look at a chart and they can see which way the wind's blowing. So yeah, it's the dollar's getting weaker and interest rates are going higher.
As you've been saying, what's happened, and at the same time, that maybe is a little bit surprising. It's surprising to me in this market turmoil, actually, and maybe it is to you or not. I don't know, but is the strength of gold in this environment? It's shocking. It's like it's being seen. It looks as though as a real safe haven asset, whereas in the last financial crisis, it was not, at least not for a while.
Yeah, and of course, as we've talked about in the past, relative to other things in the world, gold is reasonably priced. Finally, it's finally caught up. So it's not underpriced anymore. But as you recently made the case very well, that if gold is going to be reinstitutionalized as a currency, which it should be, otherwise you're just using fiat, and all these governments are bankrupt. So who wants the fiat issuance of a bankrupt government? It's going to have to go to 20, 30, $40,000 an ounce. Pick a number.
Unbelievable numbers, actually. No matter how you slice it, it gets big. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking.
Well, let's see. Next question. This guy says he's working overseas in the U.S. So he's renting a house there. He has a good amount of currency in the bank with T-bills. Quarantined to basically buy a house was his plan. But he says, given what's going on right now with gold and so many dots being joined, would one be wise to make a larger allocation to physical rather than sit it in T-bills or the U.S. dollar? So there's some conjecture as to if gold will get a pullback on a demand destroying event versus just sitting in it anyway, as it's going to go higher and houses make it cheaper. He says he's not looking for financial advice. He's just trying to understand how you might look at this situation if you were in his shoes.
I understand the quandary uh, because there's really nothing, no major asset class that you can buy because you can say, hey, this is really cheap. It's obviously cheap, except for commodities. Commodities as a group are close to their lowest level in history relative to other assets. So, but I don't want to tell somebody to buy a commodity fund or ETF. I mean, listen, this is a really tough, it's always tough, but this is a really tough time. You want to know it's not a worthwhile asset class, but speaking to commodities, yeah, buy, I'm not talking about buying crappy little mining stocks, explorers and developers. You can buy stuff like Newmont or Barrick now, or Rio Tinto, big ones that pay dividends. I mean, that's a good place to be. If you want to speculate, yeah, you can buy the small ones. Same thing with oil stocks. Oil stocks are very cheap at this point. So that's where I'd put my money. But if you're saving for a house, this is I'm not giving anybody advice about what they ought to do. But anyway, look, a house is it's not an investment. It's an asset. It's a place to live. So look at it that way. Do you really want to buy a house and live there? Okay, then that's the decision. Don't think of it as being an investment. It's not. It's a money pit. In fact, houses shouldn't go up in value. They're consumer goods. They're
They
like,
go down in value.
yeah, right. They
The
should, right.
maintenance. Yeah, because
Maintenance,
yeah,
taxes are huge some places. And people
right.
in places like Illinois pay pretty damn close to 2% on the value of their houses. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's like paying rent to the government. So, uh,
Yeah, it's a tough problem. But short-term T-bills, rolling them over, I guess that's probably still the safest place to keep it if you're trying to, if it's your if money you plan to deploy in the future. But I don't know.
yeah, best answer is earn more money while economies still hung together more or less on the old basis. Because I got a
Yeah.
feeling there's going to be a lot of unemployment in the years to come, and that'll be tough.
Yep. This is kind of an interesting question, Doug. Which system of measurement do you like better, the metric system or the American system?
Well, the metric system is without question much more logical. So what are we measuring? Okay, you got distance, you got volume, you got weight, and distance, volume, weight. What am I missing?
I think that's it.
Yeah. So there's some things like a foot. I mean, that's a logical way of saying something. I mean, who thinks in terms of centimeters for
Yeah.
human? You don't. But at the same time, like a bushel, a bushel is a unit of volume, and a bushel of wheat or corn or soybeans all weigh quite a bit different from each other. So you should be trading those things not by the bushel, which is irrational, but by the weight,
Hmm.
the kilogram. So uh, yeah, the English, uh, there's a certain logic to it. Like
Yeah. Well, I guess the other one is weight. That is the fourth one that you didn't that in your
uh,
list because you had
yeah,
there's weight. Yeah.
okay, well, pound, a kilo, metric ton, short ton. It the metric system is a better thing to get used to. So really, the U.S. ought to officially dispense with English weights and they're antiquated.
Well, even in the U.S. military back when I was in, they use the metric system.
Yeah, and cars are all going to metric these days. I mean, you know, I don't know if anybody buys a half-inch socket wrench anymore. You buy the metric equivalent.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's on its way out.
What do you think about measurement and temperature, though? Do you like the
So that's the other one, Celsius and Fahrenheit. Once again, uh, you know, I mean, actually, Kelvin degrees from absolute zero to no limit. Yeah, centigrade just makes more sense across the board.
hmm. I have a hard time getting used to it. I can't quite feels imprecise to me.
Yeah, but it's actually much more
Precise.
precise.
Yeah, but when someone describes the weather, they say it's 19 degrees. I go, well, it could be good. Could also be a little chilly. Depends, you know?
Well, it's like when the Brits, what was it, 25 years ago, went from the pound with shillings and pence. I mean, it really was incomprehensible that they were using this medieval system where there were 20 shillings to a pound. And so it makes sense to go decimal. It's just easier to deal with.
Way better. Yeah. Well, I remember it wasn't that long ago the stock market switched to decimals from fractions, right? It wasn't that long ago. I remember as a kid reading the Wall Street Journal and it'd all be in fractions.
Yeah, I guess I guess that's a good point. I've never thought about that really.
All right. So this next question is a Canadian, somebody they say that Canada is always way ahead of the US with new banking technology. They were the first to get the tap for your credit card, tap to pay, e-transfers, first using debit cards. She says that she thinks that Canada is being used as a testing ground for the banking industry. It's a smaller market, but very similar to the US in many ways. And with Mark Carney being installed as prime minister, she's worried that the implementation of the CBDCs or worse will be coming there soon. Um, and also with the tariffs, she thinks that Canada could be the first to collapse and all these things. So anyway, she says, no, I know you both have left the West, but I'm not able to leave because of family situation. Um, I keep all my assets out of the banks, but as a small business owner, I have to remain connected to the system. I sell physical products that I make mainly to the US, and I'm successful, not a millionaire though. I'd love to leave Canada, so I'd like to position myself to leave if I could. What advice would you have for someone like me?
Yeah, Canada really should rewrite its national anthem from "Oh Canada" to "Poor Canada." It'd still be singable. The taxes are higher in Canada. The regulations are higher in Canada. Uh, it's not a, it's not really a business-friendly place, quite frankly. Uh, Standard of living is lower. I mean, it used to be on a par with the US. Now, in terms of average incomes and so forth, it's on something on the order of 70 to 75%. And I see no reason why it's not going to continue heading down. And you're right, it is kind of like a beta testing area for the US, same culture. But hey, let's try it on Canada, see how it works. But this all makes sense. And other things about Canada, Canada is no longer Canada. I mean, you can forget about Sergeant Preston of the Yukon and his Wonder Dog King. I mean, this is ancient history. It's the immigration situation in Canada is actually much worse than the U.S. in that most of their the new Canadian residents or to be citizens are from the subcontinent, India and Pakistan. So that's a very different culture and it's changing Canada a lot, a lot. So yeah, I'd make the chicken run, frankly. It's too bad. I was a big fan of Canada. I lived there for years. Used to
Yeah,
love used to
if she
love it.
can't, if she can't leave, certainly have it. The first step would be at least to have some assets outside of the country, right? Some that,
Yeah, yeah. While it's still possible because foreign exchange controls, know, I mean, right now the Canadian dollar, as we said earlier, is really going up quickly against the US dollar. But if it goes down a lot, who knows what the government might do as far as telling you, Canadians, you can't send your money outside the country anymore.
yeah. I mean, one of the simple things is you can buy gold and have it stored outside of the country that can, at least it's out of the reach. It's in a precious metal you want to have anyway. And it kind of gets one of the easiest things you can do to own assets outside of your home country.
Yeah, and I understand the problem that this lady said that she's got in particular with her family, but a really big plus about Canada is that if you cut your ties with the country, sell your house, basically, you can live tax-free. And that's not true if you're an American. This is a big, big deal. So I think that if you can move out of the country, you should take advantage of it.
Okay. What do you think of Robert Prechter's idea that gold may be hitting a super cycle top?
I've got a lot of respect for Bob. He's very smart, very well-disciplined, technical trader. He's a believer in oh, Jesus, what is that called? It's a slips my mind.
Is it,
But
is it Dow theory or
no, 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 not
oh,
the
it's the
Dow
other one?
theory. God, it's
Elliott wave.
Elliott wave, exactly. Um, I don't know. I'm not really a believer in technical charting. which that's a form of looking at the chart. You know, it's I use charts. I love to have charts, but that's just because they give me a perspective of whether relative to the past something is cheap or dear. It's good to know. And what's the current trend seem to be? It's good to know. But when it comes to any kind of mechanical, mechanistic method, I don't buy it.
Hmm. Well,
So he could be right, but we've talked about gold earlier, and
yeah, and if he's right, basically it would mean that we're entering a huge, huge deflationary cycle, right? So gold would go down relative to everything else.
yeah, and I read Bob's letter, and I really enjoy it. It's very well written, very thoughtful, uh, very erudite. But the big question, I guess, is the dollar going to be totally destroyed fairly soon? Or could we have a deflationary collapse where there's so much debt that people just can't pay it? It's defaulted on, and it's a daisy chain. He can't pay, therefore, the guy that thought he had an asset with the other guy's debt can't pay, pop, 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 and the dollar. So it's, I don't know, maybe he's right. I don't.
Yeah, it could happen, but you got to imagine that the powers that be do not want that to happen more than anything, right?
Oh, of course, they don't want to see this happen. I mean, they'd rather, I mean, it's such a great grift that they have going on. They don't want things to fall apart and chaos to reign over the land and, perhaps winding up with most of them hung by lampposts from their heels. So no,
They'd rather
it's
print to
not to happen.
oblivion than let that happen.
Yeah.
Not to say it couldn't, but okay. What's your opinion on antitrust laws? He says, I know as libertarians want as little laws as possible, but I find myself having mixed views on this topic. Yes, free market is great, but do the antitrust laws serve a good purpose in any way? He says the Atwoodian idea of one big giant corporation owning everything comes to mind.
Any government interference in the economy is by itself a bad thing. So that no, I'm opposed to antitrust laws, but I understand the point that he's making because big government and government's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, naturally is oriented towards dealing with big entities. So those big entities dealing with the government, which now controls, I don't know what percentage, depends on what numbers you look at, 30, 40% of the economy, something like that. Yeah, they work together. At the same time, the government might get a little bit afraid of if they, unless they want to nationalize these things, that you don't want them to get too big. I mean, the tail might start wagging the dog, but it's not the government; it's the country. I understand. The problem is the government uh, itself. You wouldn't need these laws, and yes, they're a bad thing, but these companies that get big usually get really big because of dealing with the government. That's how you get a lot of the time as big as you get.
Exactly. The regulations basically keep, the incumbents in power more than anything else.
Yeah, they do. Their regulations are much, much better for the big guys than the little guys because the big guys can afford the accountants and the tax lawyers and other kinds of lawyers. They can afford to pay the bribes, direct and indirect, to the politicians, which little guys really can't. So, yeah, well, it's what fascism's all about. Okay. It's the corporations and the government working together.
That's what we see a lot of. Okay. He said, I might not be thinking about this correctly, but for the last 15 to 20 years, I've invested in royalty and streaming companies as opposed to mining companies or mining ETFs. My rationale has been that the guy running those companies do this for a living and know the industry way better than I ever will. Is he thinking properly about it?
I'm a big fan of royalty companies. Franco-Nevada, run by Pierre Lassonde, was the first one, and it was inordinately successful, hugely successful. Um, and now, I don't know, there's probably 20 of them. There's, I think there's too many of them. Are there that many royalty geniuses out there like Pierre was? I don't know. So, like a lot of things, it was a good idea, and then the market makes it much bigger than it otherwise would be. So hold on to the royalty companies. I think they're great. They're a low risk way of playing with mining stocks.
Okay. Doug, what's your take on Cambodia? They said they've been there twice and they've seen a lot of condo and infrastructure construction, and just want to know your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I've been to Cambodia, oddly enough, twice as well. And it's got some beaches, which are very popular with Russians, especially. And it's got Angkor Wat. And but the problem with Cambodia is that they had this nasty time with Pol Pot, where something on the order of 25% of the country were brutally killed. That's a lot. That's that's worse than what happened in Rwanda, for God's sake. And they still haven't prosecuted and imprisoned any of those people. Pol Pot himself got off scot-free.
Mm.
I don't think that they've ever had. Uh, so this, I wonder in a country, any country, that has that kind of a bloodbath internally, whether it, there won't be consequences down the road, frankly. So I guess I'm not such a great fan of of Cambodia.
Like just there could be the seeds of some future conflict planted in the last one you're saying.
Yeah, that's what I'm guessing. I am a big fan of Southeast Asia. Love Thailand. I think Vietnam is great too, actually. Uh, but Cambodia, no. In fact, I even like Laos better. I mean, I've been to Laos just once and spent a couple of days really just in Vientiane, the capital, and it was delightful. Small city on, is it on the Mekong or another river? But very nice, nice expat community that I saw. Listen, I love Southeast Asia, but I'm not sure for the reasons that I mentioned that Cambodia would be my number one choice.
Makes sense, especially if you wear glasses, right? Didn't they kill all the people who wore glasses?
Yeah, and people that didn't have calluses on their hands
Oh,
was the other indicator who had to go.
hmm. Yeah, don't love that. Okay. What part of Argentina would give you the most self-sufficiency in terms of water, agriculture, etc.?
Yeah, well, Argentina's a big country. I mean, from the glaciers in the south to the jungles in the north, the seacoast. Where would I go? Well, I wound up in Salta, but I really wound up in Uruguay, as it turns out. If I was going to be objective about it, uh, I would probably choose someplace around Mendoza.
Hmm.
Got the mountains and the grapes, and wherever there's grapes and wine, there's usually a very nice culture that grows up around it because of that, because the climate is conducive and it's very beautiful because of the mountains and plenty of water because of the mountains. Uh, so yeah, Mendoza's great, and that area is great. But I hate to generalize.
Yeah,
That's like,
yeah.
where do you want to live in the U.S.? Do you want a lot
You
of
know,
choice?
and no matter where you live, it's all about your specific setup. Your
Yeah,
quality, you can have a great quality of life living almost anywhere in the world. if you have the right setup. And some of that's, so yeah, it's very hard to generalize.
You just want a place that's politically and economically and sociologically stable or growing or getting better. That's what
Right.
you want. That's the key.
Okay. Doug, if you were to start a country, where would it be ideally? And how big population, geographic size would you say is the ideal nation state?
Well, I've never thought of starting a country. That's too hard. And there are islands which lend themselves to this type of thing in the world that are actually quite large and quite amenable to starting a new country.
Hmm.
But that's too hard because it takes billions of dollars today, billions, in order to put in the infrastructure that you'd want to make a country successful. Now, as I think most of the listeners know, my hobby for many years actually wasn't trying to start a country, but to take a shithole country and get the government to reform itself and turn itself into a, a new Singapore, a new Singapore on steroids. And I've had significant adventures in 10 different countries talking to the government in those places. And it's been fun, fun. It really has been. Uh, so
What do you think
starting a
about
company, you know, Elon Musk could do it if he took $10 billion dollars and you could buy, like you might be able to buy Nauru, which is uh, an island country, member of the UN, all this type of thing. Totally, totally destroyed ecologically. Could probably buy all the people out, tell them to go someplace else, and bulldoze the whole damned island, and put new topsoil in it, and that's a couple billion dollars. Yeah, he could do it. I think he should do it because actually having political sovereignty that's that is the most valuable asset of any small country. I'm not just saying selling citizenships and all that type of thing, but so that's what should be done to start a new country or take over an old one. And I've pretty well given that up. I've had so many fun experiences talking to military dictators and this type of thing. But it's you got to do that full time. It can't be a hobby.
it?
Make it into a hobby. It doesn't work. Although it's fun.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. In the recent chat with Frank Giustra, it says Doug expressed total agreement with Frank on most everything outside of charitable foundations. He says, it seems to me there may be a difference of opinions on Bitcoin as well. Or did Doug revert back to sanity about crypto recently? I guess he's saying Frank is known for criticizing Bitcoin. And we have talked about Bitcoin positively here. Yeah, how do you reconcile those two things, I guess?
I don't think Frank is actually opposed to Bitcoin. I think the famous debate that he had with Michael Saylor was basically that gold is superior to Bitcoin. Oh, okay. I can see both sides of the argument. I own both. I own a lot more gold. But anyway, Frank is a very smart and shrewd and also very affable guy. He doesn't, I mean, it's nice. I mean, I've things that we disagree on. The only time that Frank got a little bit acerbic with me was when I said some really unkind words about the Clintons. And, he rose to their defense because he's been involved with them and he's a loyal guy. So we don't talk about that. But I don't know what I can say. What do you think,
Yeah.
Matt?
Well, I was just saying, I don't think that what Frank was criticizing about Bitcoin was Michael Saylor's suggesting you sell a kidney, you mortgage your home, you do whatever you got to do to get your hands on some Bitcoin, which is so uh, financially irresponsible, to say something like that. That like if you did that as a stock promoter in normal circumstances, this is like, well, you'd be in jail, right? I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, and the other thing that Michael Saylor said that I think Frank thinks is kind of goofy, and it is goofy, was Saylor said that you ought to throw away your Bitcoin when you die so that the rest of the Bitcoins become, well, I can think of better things to do with capital than destroy it.
Right, exactly. And if I was like, if he's so enthusiastic about destroying his Bitcoin when he dies, why doesn't he just destroy half of it now to prove his point? You know,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I don't even like. Can you believe him? You know, he's making these. You know, when he's saying these things, he's making his life's aspiration to acquire as much as possible so that he can destroy it when he dies. I mean, that's
yeah.
weird. Doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'd like to get to know Saylor. I mean, he's done well. He seems like a really interesting guy, but I'd like to get a better grip on his economic thinking and psychology in a personal conversation as opposed to a public platform,
Right.
which
Yeah,
distorts things.
yeah, no doubt about it. Um, uh, let's see. Doug, have you kept up much with the explosion of growth in Guyana?
Yeah, I have. I've been to Guyana a couple times, actually, including way out in the jungles. And it's mostly jungles, just rivers running through lots of jungles and tapuis, those structures that rise out of the jungle with their own ecosystems on the top of it, and so forth. So yeah, I don't know about Guyana. It's got less than 1 million people, and it's about the size of the state of Georgia.
Hmm.
So it's not many people, and they all live on the coast, quite frankly. Problem with Guyana is that I think I'm right. About half of the population are blacks, and about half are Indians, Hindus. And the blacks, if they have a religion, most of them do, because it's a Caribbean country. It's not a South American country culturally, really at all. It's a Caribbean country. Most of the blacks are Christians, and most of the Indians are Hindus or Muslims. So, and they really flock together. They don't really intermarry. It's so I think it's sociologically and politically unstable. Uh, so I think it's okay. I mean, I think it's like living in a Caribbean island that's not. Yeah, it's okay. I think it's got a future. Especially trouble is the oil, this giant oil find that it's got. I don't think there's no way the Venezuelans are going to succeed in taking that away from them. That isn't going to happen for all kinds of reasons. But uh, but it's not. That oil is going to go to the government's coffers. And what's going to happen is the Indians and the blacks and the Hindus and the Christians and the Muslims, who all align in their own little groups, they're going to try to steal it all for their group. And it could become a disastrous thing because they don't produce anything other than having all this money thrown at them, and they're not producing anything to they wouldn't know what oil was unless somebody came down there and showed them. So,
It's amazing
but
how something so
I'm I'm fine with Guyana, but it's a place with problems. But the problems don't have to bother you, is what I'm saying. Just keep them in mind.
it's amazing that like such a huge find, such a huge wealth creating find like that could be the source of the country's future turmoil, though.
Yeah,
Prove it
exactly.
wrong.
Well, there's an old saying, don't invest in a country that has green in its flag. And if you look at the flag of Guyana, like most of these third world countries, it has green. They all turn themselves into shitholes. So going back to the other question, if I started a country, I certainly wouldn't put green in the flag.
Good to know. Okay. Just a couple more questions, Doug. We've got a bunch, but we're a little long on time, so let's ask you a couple more. What are your views on how a hot war with China could possibly play out for the world?
really badly. Although I don't even think that China is going to attack Taiwan. I don't think it's going to happen. And nothing to do with Trump, just because I don't think it makes any sense for China. Yeah, but wait a minute. I think it's more likely that countries are going to start falling apart, not accreting and getting bigger. This is the funny thing about Trump wanting to take over Greenland and take over Canada and take over Panama and I don't know where else. So you want to take over Haiti too?
Well, you
Maybe it's
certainly
not for that.
Ukraine and Gaza Strip, I think,
Oh,
right?
Ukraine and Gaza Strip. I forgot that. This is like a star at the end of its life goes supernova and subsumes everything into itself. And that's the end of the story, not the beginning of the story when you start doing this kind of stuff. Uh, so I'll make a guess, and that is that Canada might take over Taiwan, but it'll be peaceable in the future because these are not stupid people. Yeah, why attack something when it'll eventually, whatever will happen. So if there's some way the US can, by sticking its nose into things, you know, arming up Taiwan to defend itself against China, I mean, this is, who knows what kind of antagonisms that can cause. But no, I don't think that even though the US is like plumping for a war with, yeah, we talked about this before, Thucydides' dilemma, uh, where the old established power that's losing ground, like the US, and the young rising power like China, well, it better take them out now because they're going to get bigger and overtake us. Well, you don't need to do that, quite frankly. The whole thing is stupid. But yeah, United States, you know, with its 750 military bases around the world, and now Trump saying that he's going to increase military spending. Thought he wanted to cut the government, but it increases from 800 to a trillion. Anything's possible. We're
Hmm.
dealing with lunatics.
All right, last question for you, Doug. I know Doug is famous for his metals knowledge, and I gather he has residences in more than a couple locations, as well as your land banking in Argentina. He says, just wondering if you've ever pursued investments in revenue generating real estate, like residential or commercial or industrial property in your past endeavors in different countries.
No, because it's got to be actively managed. And I don't like to actively manage things. And you got to deal with the people that are renting it from you. And especially when you're talking about non-business, but retail type stuff, houses and apartments, you know, it's a matter. I think, listen, there's people that have done really, really well and are really, really good at it, but I'm not interested in that stuff. So the answer is basically no.
Okay. All right, good. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there for today, Doug. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend. We'll be back next week.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Matt. And over the weekend, I hope to devote a good block of time to adding stuff that needs to be done to our book, the preparation. I don't want to be the weak link in getting that thing out and published and changing a little part of the world, maybe. We'll have to see.
Well, it's changed a part of my world through Maxim already, so I think it'll have a big
Yeah.
effect.
I mean, one person who's doing extremely well. God, I'm so impressed with what Max is doing. Uh, it's not a statistically valid sampling, but
But it's the one that matters to me, so
that's that's right. Charity begins at home.
that's right. Okay, awesome, Doug. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you next week.
Okay, thanks, Matt.